Hello, church. Back in 2 Samuel, chapters 19 and 20. It's going to be a great day. Let's jump in together. So in chapter 19, we have David back on the throne, and there's groups of people that are responding to his leadership. We may talk about that in a minute, but I want to focus first on the response of specifically two individuals in this chapter, Ziba and Mephibosheth. So I want to look at verses 24 to verses kind of down to verse 30. This is where Mephibosheth is back into the story again. And David asks him why he didn't go with him when he had to flee Jerusalem from Absalom. Now we got to get a little bit of background and remember the story here. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 16, Ziba accused Mephibosheth to David when Ziba brought him this extravagant gift of provision for all those that were leaving Jerusalem with him. Ziba added to David that Mephibosheth had stayed in the city, hoping that the throne would be returned to the house of Saul. And so in that instance, David gives all of Mephibosheth's earthly possessions to Ziba. So now we have in this chapter here, and Mephibosheth is actually claiming that all of those allegations are false, that Ziba actually took advantage of his crippled state to try to seek an opportunity to gain favor with the king. And so David's got a really difficult situation to deal with here now. And how does he deal with it? Essentially, he just says, I'm not wise enough to know who's telling the truth here. I'm just going to split exactly 50-50, and you guys each take each one. And that's David's solution. But I want to look at this a little bit closer here for a minute, and so that we can ask ourselves who we're more like, Ziba or Mephibosheth. What do I mean by that? If you look back into verse 15 and 16, 17, we can see that Ziba it says again that he was the steward of Saul's household. What can we gather from that? This extravagant gift that he brings to David back in chapter 16 likely belonged to Mephibosheth. This gift hadn't costed Ziba anything. He likely took it from his master's belongings. Then we can see that he's actually returning to David with Shimei. In verse 16, you can see that of chapter 19. The very man who had been throwing dirt and rocks on David and who had been insulting him as he left. It would appear that Ziba is somebody that has a relationship with the king only for the sake of trying to promote himself and his own agendas. He's an opportunist trying to find ways to promote himself. What about Mephibosheth? It says in verse 24 and 25, that he had actually not trimmed his mustache or taken care of his feet, nor had he washed his clothes for the duration that David was gone, as a sign of mourning. Then if you go down to when David gives him half of his stuff back, Mephibosheth's response is, he can have it all. I'm just happy that you are back safely in the city and that I can now spend time in your presence once again. Friends, when we consider again that David is a type of Christ, this is significant when we ask this question, because when we consider Ziba as someone who is really only pursuing business transactions, not really relationship with David, in terms of what he can get out of the relationship, versus Mephibosheth, who is very willing to actually forsake what he had just so he could spend time in David's presence once again. Similar to how the disciples are in Luke chapter 18, I believe it's Peter who says, Lord, we have forsaken everything to follow you. Friends, let's ask this question today. Am I more like Ziba or am I more like Mephibosheth in terms of what I desire from Jesus? Business transactions or relationship? Ask him that question. Then, if you just want to do an overview of chapter 19, you can see about 5 different either groups of people or individuals that are responding to how David is back on the throne and that response to David's reinstatement as king. I want to encourage you, take some time today and look at the responses of all these people, either the unification of people under that or the disunity under that, and just ask the Lord which response would most closely resemble your heart before the Lord in terms of Jesus being the king on the throne in our lives. And then in chapter 20, I want to look at a really neat little story here with another wise woman. We will keep the wise woman jokes to a minimum here, but I want us to look at a wise woman in this town of Abel and what her response was to Sheba when he came to take refuge there. Joab's coming to knock the walls down. She asks him, what are you doing here, essentially? And asks him why you're going to destroy the town. No, we're not wanting to destroy the town at all. We just want to get Sheba. No problem, she says. She goes and convinces everybody in the city that we got to throw this guy's head over the wall. And they do so, and they leave in peace. What can we learn from that? 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good character. This woman recognizes that if we are going to deliver or get rid of the influence of one individual in our city, we will save ourselves and the rest of the town. What can we learn from that, church? There are influences in our lives, and maybe even to a degree some friends in our lives, that we need to don't go around cutting anyone's head off, but we need to get rid of those influences in our lives. For many of us, I would dare say, we probably don't have a lot of bad influences, but maybe we have been allowing one or two to continue on in our lives. Friends, with one or two bad influences, bad habits, bad thought patterns, we can inadvertently allow a foothold for the devil in our lives, and that can translate into much greater levels of disaster. I would encourage you and close today's devotions by asking Jesus this question: Lord, are there any influences in my life that I need to get rid of? Church, I want to encourage you to walk with Jesus today and be a light for him today.